So, hello world. Welcome to the Psych Life Podcast. I hope everybody's doing all right out there. Today, as a guest, we have Colette Monod, entrepreneur and business owner of Boss of Your Own Brain. How you doing, Colette?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well, Colette. I appreciate your invitation onto this platform. I'm sure the viewers and audio listeners appreciate it. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, if you don't mind?
Absolutely. Well, my name is Colette Monod, as I've been introduced so politely. I am 25 years old and I am living in Denver, Colorado. I have started to create my own business called Boss of Your Own Brain, in which case I want to help guide individuals in discovering how to unlock their full human potential and understanding the brain a little bit more, and how it works and how they can use it to their advantage. So I've been diving a little bit deeper into research and studies of my own to kind of take complex information and put it in more layman's terms for the average individual to understand, but more importantly, to understand why it's important, why the heck they need to know about it in order to help simplify their life, to reap success, as well as have a purpose for their life and have some passion towards that purpose.
Oh, that sounds really cool. It sounds like you really have a good vision and mission for Boss of Your Own Brain, which actually, like I was telling you, is a pretty cool name. I'm actually jealous that I didn't think of that name. And when you mentioned it, I think in one of your posts, that's how I found you, through Instagram. You posted something that caught my attention, and I think you also reposted one of our posts, which I appreciate that. And I saw that you were trying your own thing, and you even mentioned that you were trying to do a workshop, which is something I'm going to have to take notes on from you, because I've thought about doing it and I've been hesitant. So it just goes to show how sometimes credentials don't always mean everything, because there's courage involved in every decision that we make. So why don't you let the audience know a little bit, if you don't mind, Colette, about what got you to make Boss of Your Own Brain? Was there something that happened in your life that gave you this idea? Because oftentimes the best ideas come from when we're at our bottom, when we really have to look in the mirror and self-reflect about ourselves and think about ourselves in that type of format, where what are we doing with our lives? What am I doing? How am I going to go about my business? So how did you come up with such a cool name?
Well, thank you so much for that compliment there. Well, I kind of started thinking about the idea. I've always wanted to be a teacher, and I kind of had a limiting belief of what a teacher could be. I pictured an individual standing in front of, say, 30 individuals, primarily children, because that had been a passion of mine since a young child, to be a teacher in that clinical setting. And once again, it was just this limiting belief that that's all I could do with my teaching profession. Then I joined a company that kind of expanded my idea, which I think we'll talk about here in a minute, about imagery. And one thing led to another, and I just wasn't feeling fully satisfied. I loved educating students and teachers and helping them to make more of an impact in the teachers make more of an impact for the students in their lives, and helping the students have that impact so that they were receiving the education that was necessary for them to succeed in life. But part of me was feeling unfulfilled, and I didn't know quite why. So I was thinking about different ideas, and I started listening to audiobooks of self-development and reading books that just kind of put me on this track of questioning more inwards on what I wanted out from life, as opposed to thinking of where did I fit into these categories that have already been created as such in life, in general. So what made me start thinking about that was the aspect that I wasn't fulfilled, right? And so when I decided to come, what made me think of this name, I was actually sitting on a plane. But before came up with the idea of Boss of Your Own Brain, I was just thinking about, how can I help others? I'm helping students ages kindergarten through high school, but there's a larger demographic of individuals that have gone through the education system that still need help. They don't have a direction, they don't have a purpose, and they're kind of just going through the motions of life on this autopilot that we'll talk about, I'm sure, here in just a little. But it made me kind of furious to see that there's so much potential out there in the world. There's so many good ideas that are had on a daily basis, but nothing comes of them. And I personally believed at that time that if we could give a voice to these individuals so that their ideas could be shared with the world might end up being a better place. So that was the platform of why I wanted to kind of spark out of the traditional frame of teaching and start my own kind of different, non-traditional teaching on an online platform. The name Boss of Your Own Brain, like I said, came from, I was sitting on a plane. Actually, I was on my way to deliver a workshop on imagery for a company I work for. And I was just kind of thinking about acronyms. And I thought, oh, it would be really cool to have an acronym that you could shorten down and have it kind of maybe be a logo one day, right? Really thinking long term, using my imagery in that compartment. And I started thinking of, what acronym could I use? So I was putting letters down on paper, playing around with different names, and I knew I wanted it to be revolved around the brain. And so Boss of Your Own Brain kind of hit me because I was thinking of BYOB. And then I molded over and I talked to my friend and she goes, I think you should have the little O in there, Boss of Your Own Brain, so that it stands out as opposed to just BYOB, because then if someone were to go Google it when I get big, they would be confused with BYOB versus Boss of Your Own Brain, BOYOB. So it really kind of came together in that sense. And I had this strong vision of what I wanted to see for the company, how I pictured it long-term in the logo, say. And I really just wanted the message that you can control what you think. Even though sometimes you feel as though you can't, there are different ways and methods that you can learn on how to really control your mind, because your brain is just a very, very, very well-oiled machine. I've said it before on my platform, and I'll say it again here. If we can understand something fully, then we'll be able to be successful at it. So I think that's important too, of the brain. If we can understand the brain as human beings, we all have it. And it's our standout factor from any other species on this planet. We have conscious thought. And so we can really wrap our minds around that. I feel like we can make a difference. So that kind of, all that really spiraled the idea.
Well, you hit so many points there, honestly, and I wish I had a paper and pen because you really opened up Pandora's box here, and you touched on a lot of good subjects. And so we're gonna get into each one, but I guess, like I said, like I told you from the beginning, I typically come from a more structured background, much like yourself. And I got my I'm in process for licensure, my master's, and this time for this interview, I did not come with a structured setting because I actually want to let this conversation flow. And so, with that being said, what do you find wrong with the way education is put out there in today's society? Because you said that you wanted to be a teacher that from K to 12, you even experimented with it, but you saw that there were a lot of kids being left behind. And we're not talking about George Bush's kid, no kids left. We're talking about kids left behind. I'm working in the field too, and I'm always working with the kids that are being left behind. That's the thing. Kids that are dropping out, kids that are having trouble at home, kids that are falling behind and they're using substances just because they're trying to use that substance as a coping mechanism to try and find joy in their life. And so we'll start. You really did open up, Colette, a Pandora's box. So I guess we'll start there. What is your definition, or what? Not your definition, but what do you find wrong with the education system here in the U.S. and worldwide? To be honest with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love this question because education is something that I hold near and dear to my heart. And I think to be successful at anything in life, it starts with education. I think teachers are undervalued, but they have a very hard job to do. They have to educate a whole class of individuals that have different minds. So I once read in a book, teachers are the doctors of the mind, because they have to teach a subject to students, but not just one way. They have to make sure that every single student is understanding. So what I've learned through my adult career is that the way that the education system in America, and I'm not going to speak for other countries because I'm not familiar with other countries, but let's just start with what I do know. The education system in America teaches content-based material. And what that means is you have a big corporation like, say, McGraw-Hill or Pearson that pumps out all of this content. information, whether it's science, whether it's language arts and English, whether it's social studies, history, mathematics, that's content. What we need to peel the layers back and teach in primary grades through kindergarten and third grade is process-based instruction. And so when I differentiate those two terminologies, content-based versus process-based, I want to highlight that process-based means the way that the brain is actually processing the information. It doesn't matter if you were teaching about World War I or if you were teaching about the landing on the moon, right? The first moonwalk. Doesn't matter the content, it's the way that it's being delivered. Is the individual student able to process and retain and store that information in the brain? So that is a foundational skill that is assumed and is not taught throughout school systems. So with that being said, when you take a standard school, you're teaching the young mind of a student from pre-K all the way through third grade to learn how to read. After third grade, that stops, and now they are reading to learn. So if they haven't built their foundational skill set on how to process information, no matter what the information is, right? Mathematics, language arts, like I said, doesn't matter the content. If they haven't learned how to process through reading, listening, comprehension, they're not going to be able to retain that information to be able to build on the grade level and the grade level. So the complexity just gets harder and harder, especially when you think of high school and then college. It's a lot of independent work. So if they haven't developed that process within the brain, you start to see the gap increase and increase and increase. And so a stunning fact is most of the individuals incarcerated have a third grade reading level, because you can get by at a third grade reading level, but you can't succeed. You cannot critically think, draw conclusions, make inferences, and things of that nature. So that's basically what I have come to learn in my time as a professional educator, is that there's a big difference between process-based instruction and content-based instruction. And we need to be teaching and understand why it's important that some individuals are born with really excellent processing in their brains, and others have to develop it. But that's the key. You can be the boss once you understand, hey, I'm not really great with reading. I much rather watch a video. Well, why is that? Because you don't have a strong ability to process information when you're just reading it off of the page. It's easier for you to process the information when you're watching it. And that just goes back generationally to television. And it's that opens up another Pandora's box there on imagery, which is one of my favorite topics.
You touched on a good point there, which is it's based on content based and not process based. And that's a unique way to word it, but it's true. And the way, if you don't mind me adding to that a little bit, they never in school, they never teach real world stuff. And for example, gym class. I mean, gym class is about playing volleyball. It's about basketball. It's about running tracks. And even then, they're already pulling that back from the schools, because if a kid faints, they're going to sue the school. So it almost like the education system is built on fear from that sense. But where I was going to go with this was, they never teach you about the body. They never teach you about how this functions, because this is a miracle. And they never teach you on how to process information, which is what you were talking about. And they also never teach kids on how to be social, not necessarily social norms, because that word, I don't want kids to be taught how to fit in a box, but I do want them to understand what's okay and what's not, the boundaries involved. And when we talk about No Kid Left Behind, they opened up, over the last 20 years, the word mental health has been thrown around there like if it's nothing, like if it's a sack of hot potatoes now. And they made a lot of agencies that are government funded like mine. And what they'll do is that we'll provide therapeutic services to these individuals, and we'll go to the house. We'll even provide therapy, or they'll come to our office. And what I'm seeing a lot of times is that the school system doesn't know how to handle them. And because of the issues that are happening in the house, it translates into the education system. And educators like yourself sometimes are burdened with having this kid and causing disruptions and there's no way to go. And why would the kid want to pay attention if the subject matter is not something that's going to help him in his life?
Mm-hmm.
And so the whole education system, it's set up, like you said, content based. Here's history, here's language arts, but things can only happen up to a certain level. At some point, things have to be taught that can be applied in the real world. And now with the not social media per se, but the access to information the way it is, people can just go online and research on how to make money, the stock market, about the body, about the brain, and they can start applying it in their life. And this is what's happening now is amazing. People like yourself, people like myself, can create brands, and we can really take things to the next level virtually without having to be in the physical. And I'm seeing that society's having a tough time adapting to that. The system in general is having a tough time adapting to that. So I really appreciate you, for the work you do as an educator. You were doing before, and you saw that you wanted something more for yourself, and that's okay, because that's what life is all about, expansion. You mind, I'm sorry I'm switching topics a little bit, but there's so many things I want to touch on. With the guided imagery, that word is something else now that gets thrown around a lot. And I haven't, and like I admitted to you, I haven't used guided imagery per se in my short time as a clinician, but I love to learn more about it. I mean, I'm pretty knowledgeable about it, but there's one thing being knowledgeable about something and applying it. Do you mind sharing to the audience? And I hope, this podcast is worthy to all of you guys out there, but would you mind sharing with the audience what exactly is guided imagery? So maybe they can become a little bit more aware on the topic.
Absolutely. And I love that you bring up, because imagery is something that I consider myself an expert in, because it's something that I have used daily. And once I've been introduced to it, I've never gone back. So I'm going to give you an example. Have you ever read a book and then watched a movie and thought to yourself, why the heck did they cast that as the main character? That's not who I was picturing. Has that ever happened to you?
Yes, big time.
Yeah, so that is the ability to create mental representation for what you read. So there is imagery when you're reading a book. There's imagery when you're talking, like a conversation we're having right now, the ability to comprehend and understand what I'm saying. That requires imagery. Not every mind can do that automatically. Sometimes it has to be taught. That's a process that has to be taught. So kind of peeling back the layers to that topic of what is not taught in the education system is imagery. So then there's no wonder why when individuals graduate from that faulty education system, they struggle in society and they don't understand how to connect the dots, because there's something that's linked to higher order thinking. And that's not my own thoughts. Bloom's taxonomy of higher order thinking, you can look it up, and if you're not familiar with it, but there's comprehending, understanding, then there's critically thinking, putting pieces together. So in order to do any of that, you need to be able to first create imagery. Creating imagery for a word is how you can start off basically. Like if I were to say the beach, you can picture the crystal clear blue ocean with the soft yellow sand. You can hear the breeze. I'm painting that picture in your mind visually right now. Even if you're not able to do so independently, you can work on exercise. And that's part of what I want to help to show individuals, that this is a skill related to casting a vision for a future version of yourself. So imagery is super important. And in order to understand guided imagery, you need to be able to understand, are you an individual? Are you a brain that can process information in this way automatically? Or do you have to take the time to strengthen that muscle? Because I like to always refer to the brain as a muscle, just like your biceps or your quads. If you were going to train for a half marathon, you wouldn't run once a week, you'd run every day. Likewise with your mind, if you want to get really good at this idea of manifestation imagery, guided imagery, you need to practice doing so every day. And so the way in which we can strengthen that muscle is by getting very specific and using details such as size, color, number, shape, getting very, very detailed on what you're picturing, starting off first simply with a word and then expanding it into a sentence, multiple sentences, and making it relevant to you in your life.
So I guess the best way for the audience to put it, and that was a really good explanation, Colette, is that we all engage in imagery, but there's a difference between the imagery that we unconsciously engage in on our daily basis and guided imagery to have a vision towards something. And
Absolutely.
this isn't as simple as just close your eyes and just let's sit on it. There has to be um, there has to be a guide almost to it. In your experience, how do you guide the person to have the vision of themselves, of the higher person or the ideal self, and
Sure.
what happiness would look like? How do you guide them through that process? Because imagery, we all have it. If, like you said, I say the word, you said the word beach, immediately I thought of Miami Beach, because that's
Yeah.
where, obviously I'm from. And so it's not till you bring it up that I realize, hey, we all unconsciously engage in imagery, but guided imagery, there's a difference there.
Absolutely. So when we think of guided imagery, like I said, you do have to practice it. It is something that you want to be aware of in that moment, and that how strong is your ability. So I use an example, and this is something that I'll show in my courses, is that perfect example of beach. Now I say, okay, you've pictured that, got it, success, picture success. It's a much harder thing, number one, because it looks different for everybody. And number two, it's just a difficult word. It's more of an abstract concept. Like success for you may look very different than success for me. It's still success nonetheless. So when we think about these more abstract concepts of what does happiness look like for me? What does pure joy? We need to first peel back the layers and understand, do I have a good self-image of myself? That's where imagery really comes into play first. Looking at oneself and understanding, do I have confidence in me to believe that I'm worth a successful life, to believe that I am worth happiness? Because a lot of people don't even have that surface level of self-love, self-respect, in that they deserve this type of life that they are trying to image. So if they can't first see themselves attaining it, they won't be able to forecast that vision forward to actually take steps towards that vision of success. So I think that brings up a really big topic of self-love, self-care, and kind of diving into how you're going to develop that relationship with yourself, because you can't give love to others or help others in a world if you can't first take time to understand, love yourself, respect yourself, and hold space for yourself. So I think that's a big topic that needs to be touched upon there. But after you're able to dive into, okay, I can see myself, there's a level and a scale that I read from an abstract, the name of it is slipping my mind at the moment, but I recall from the article that there is this kind of varying scale that you use with, say, a client to see if they are ready to start setting up SMART goals, right? So how confident do you feel that you are able to step forward into a role in starting to create your own level of success, your own vision of happiness in your life? If it's anything less than a 7, then they need to work on building their self-esteem and their self-confidence. So if they answer that question and they answer a 5, they're not ready to start setting up measurable goals to start on the path to this vision of success, because they don't believe enough in themselves to have that. They're going to continue to doubt themselves. They're going to continue to listen to those limiting beliefs that have been playing in their mind year after year. And that's that subconscious voice that has been formed over time, and kind of making that differentiation to stopping that more subconscious thought and bringing up more of a conscious awareness that you're having these negative limiting beliefs of yourself.
Oh, well, bringing the unconscious to the conscious is something I preach all the time. And guided imagery seems, I've engaged in it. I've never used it with my clients, but I've been part of guided imagery before several times, and it has helped me realize and self-reflect on my, let's call them desires, because success for me, you say it's different for everybody else, but success for me is growth. And I think those two words are synonymous, because human beings naturally, we're always wanting to expand, and in expanding we adjust. And so when we stop expanding, let's say one of us gets a job and we're working there for 10 years, there's no possibility of growth within that company, or we're stagnant and we haven't taken the next step in life in 10 years. We're in the same location. Then I start seeing how that can weigh a person down. And so mental health is a lot more complicated than the way they make it seem with these checklists of symptoms. But I'm very glad that you mentioned guided imagery. And for the audience out there, if you are interested in guided imagery, I heavily suggest that you check out at Boss of Your Own Brain, if I'm not mistaken, Colette, and you can probably get in contact with Colette from there. Or do you have a website as well, Colette?
I do. It's actually just about to launch. It's going to be bossofyourownbrain.com. It's not quite ready, but the finishing touches are coming, and it should be up within the next couple of weeks.
You think I could be part of some of those workshops with the guided
Absolutely.
imagery? I could
Most
use it.
definitely.
I
Absolutely.
appreciate
I love the
I
feedback
appreciate that.
too.
I appreciate that. But it's always good to engage in self-reflection interventions. But
Absolutely.
the reason us as humans, and I know I'm generalizing this, but I'm not sure who, in today's society, our mentor doesn't have to be physically with us. There's a lot of online mentors. One of mine is, you might laugh at me and you might never expect this, but it's Sadhguru. Have you ever heard of him?
No, I have not.
He's a mystic, a yogic mystic. Well, from India. He's
Yeah.
the guy with the big beard. Well, basically, I tend to listen to him a lot, and I'm reading his book now. And he's always talking about how joy and peace are the fundamental of life. And the reason people engage in misery and they put themselves in these situations where where they feel unhappy is because they start questioning their own existence and what their purpose is. And I just want to hear your opinion, because this is a real podcast. So we ask real questions, where when people talk about success and they start mentioning external objects, materialistic goals, external goals, as if they get them, they're going to be happy. What would you consider that happiness?
I would not. And I would ask them, what's after that? Once you have that, then what do you picture you'd get after that? So let's say, for example, someone's version of success is having millions of dollars and having a beachfront estate with the finest cars, jet planes, etc. Well, first of all, they're going to be spending their life in a lot of misery if that's their version of success, because that's very hard to attain for the average individual. But then I would say, okay, let's picture a world where you do receive all of those external gifts, and that's satisfying to you. Once you have that, let's picture that scenario. So I'll walk them through some of this guided imagery. I want you to visualize yourself with all of these items. How do you feel now? And turning it back, because I think the important aspect of imagery is also allowing the feeling of gratitude to take over, and really starting to understand, once I have this vision of success that I'm portraying, that might be external things, how will I feel? What's next then? Is that going to be it? Am I going to be satisfied? Probably not, because you're always going to want more and more and more. And I think that's kind of the trouble with success that is idolized here in this country, is the bigger the better. And we lose sight of the fact that really, if you have your health, you have your happiness, you have your family, internal joy, that's all you really need in life. Other things are just extra. And that's something that my grandfather has taught me always. You have your health, you have your internal happiness, and you have your family around you. I know not everyone has the same situation. Some people come from broken families, but you can build your own family as long as you have your own happiness, right? So I think that those are some internal, that is the gift of life, is love, to love yourself, to love others. So that's, I think, the biggest level of success that we all at some point need to see for ourselves. But you can lead a horse to water, you can't force them to drink. So you can send a kid to college, you can't force them to think. So I think it's something that, although I can stand from the rooftops and preach, it's life experience that's going to help said individual understand that these material goals or these material ideas are not true success, but rather it's what you feel from the pride of your work and what you're doing, your passion and purpose in this life. Once you can really find that, then I think you're on the right track to success.
Well, I appreciate that, and I agree. I agree so much because you can't choose the thoughts that come, because thoughts are like waves, but you can't choose which one you surf on. And the biggest issue I find, and I'm working with the youth, and it's common for this to happen. I was there once. It's that they identify too much with their thoughts. And what do the thoughts and the subliminal messages in our westernized society is? Who's got the nice car? Who's got the big house? And I've hung out with people with nice cars that live in a nice house. They have it all. And they hand me the phone and say, look, take a picture while I'm meditating. And then it's like, it's all fake. They're not meditating. It's just, I took the picture, because, but then it's fake. It's like, I know that person's not even having a good time right now, but yet in that one picture, it looks like they have it all together. And those are subliminal messages. And these are happening through social media. And this ties directly to the external importance that we give things when we should really be looking inside. One of the issues I'm finding is in this society, because I've been to Europe, it's just like the US. It's very fast paced. I've been to 7 countries there. I've been to Southeast Asia. They take it a little slower there. But one of the main issues I'm finding is that people are here in this westernized type of society is they always want to be on the go, and they're always running towards happiness, like if it's something to gain, when they should already be looking inside. Up, down, heaven, hell, straight, backwards, that doesn't apply. The only thing, because when the earth is round, when you look up can be anywhere depending on where you are in the world. So these polarized styles of thinking is really dividing society almost to an extent, and with division comes a lack of peace. And that is these are all intertwined things that is difficult to speak about. And I'm even somewhat I don't want to say censored, but limited into how much of this I can talk in my profession, because my profession, I have to keep it very clinical. And this is kind of like why I made Psych Life, to just talk about some,
there you go. Exactly.
it's to talk some of these things. But just to change it up here for a second, where's your mic? You have a nice picture of a nice mic.
I know. Well, I just had it. So I was playing around actually earlier with it, but I have to figure out how to get it working up in, action. So the next time we meet, I promise I'll have it up and running.
I've never seen that. Well, I've seen it before, but what's the use of the top circle around the mic?
So this top part is supposed to be the sound barrier so that it cancels out any external noises, supposedly. I actually was playing around with it this morning, recording my introduction to my future podcast, and I was having a great deal of fun with it, and it actually worked. You didn't hear too much of any noise in the background. So I think that's the purpose of it, is to cancel out the noise in the background.
After this, if you want to send me a pic of the mic, and I'll show you a couple of the settings, because I'm not sure if they sent that, because the settings, they don't have the settings, but you could adjust the settings to change where the noise coming in, how much noise and all that. So I was hoping you were going to break the ice with that mic, but that's cool. You're going to save it for your podcast, and I respect that. And I really respect that. So, we've been touching on different subjects, the educational system. We talked about guided imagery. We talked about success and what that means, and the confusion that happens with associating success with the external world instead of associating success with growth. But now I wanted to talk about mindfulness, consciousness, and unconsciousness. And once again, these are terms that get thrown out there. They stick on the wall. Now it's being thrown around in social media platforms like it's nothing. And to me, as a professional, it's a little bit bothersome sometimes. But then I remember, hey, like, this has nothing to do with my profession. This is social media. And then so I take a chill pill. But when it comes to consciousness and unconsciousness, you use the word in this podcast, subconsciousness. And I just want to see what your perspective was concerning this vocabulary, because these words and terms have changed interchangeably throughout the last 100 years, when Freud already coined the term unconscious and the whole 9 yards. So before I even get off, because I love this subject, what are the way that you're defining these terms? How do you use it?
Absolutely. So I would define subconscious as kind of like this autopilot that you're living by, that's been formed by the brain in the beginning pivotal years of your life. So as a child, you're growing up and you're just absorbing the world around you like a sponge. Whether you know it or not, your brain is constantly learning and adapting through those years. And so that's what I would call the subconscious mind, is where you learn a lot of your behaviors from parents, from teachers, experiences. And then there comes a point in your life where you've always had, but you're developing more of this conscious awareness. And I think a lot of people in our society don't live consciously, but rather they live on this autopilot. And so to really define the two separately, I think conscious thought is something that you have more control over, versus the subconscious thought is more of this automatic reaction to situations. I stub my toe, I'm going to scream and curse, or something didn't go my way, I'm sitting in traffic, now I'm going to get really frustrated about it, as opposed to taking a conscious approach of being in the moment, being present to those emotions, feeling your body, understanding, maybe I've reacted this way in a past situation because I've been programmed to. Your mind is a very, very, very well-oiled machine, your brain, right? And so it wants to repeat things because it wants to make it easier for itself, let's be honest. So that's why the brain processes these patterns and just decides, okay, it almost feels as though you don't have control over the situation. But that's where we come in and we share the information that you do. And so that's where the conscious taps in, and you're able to, it's hard. So just like riding a bike, you're not going to get it the first time. You need to practice it. But if you do practice it daily and kind of tapping into that conscious thought and hold space for your emotions, you're more likely to start living the life that you want to lead, as opposed to feeling victim of circumstance.
You touched on the subconscious, that term, it still gets used a lot, but I like the way that you used it. I typically skip that term and just refer to conscious and unconscious, but I like the way you used it because it's basically being in a car, you're driving, you start thinking about something, right? You got too entertained with your thoughts. You start giving a certain thought too much thought, or too much attention, excuse me. And then before you know it, you ended up at your location where you wanted to go. And you're like, hey, how did I get here? That
Yeah,
type of
exactly.
autopilot type of style. So I like the way you used it. As you know, Colette, the unconscious term has changed a lot, because when Freud coined it, he thought the unconscious was just survival instincts, right? That's basically what it was. And he even did some unusual type of terms, like, for example, the Oedipus complex. And excuse me, it's just English is my second language, but the Oedipus complex. And that was how growing up, a boy will have a crush on his mom. And the same thing goes for the female girl. They'll have a crush on their dad around the age of 6. And now we know, right, that there is an unconscious basis to everything, but it's not exactly like that, the way he put it. It's not survival based, to the extinct, almost next to animalistic almost. And we are animals, but that almost reptilian instinct is what he was talking about. So the reason I mention this is because we're now, for years, psychologists and brain scientists, they didn't want to use the word unconscious. They didn't want to use it. There was like a 30 to 40 year period where the behaviorists took over. The only thing they wanted to talk about was consciousness, because unconsciousness was something that couldn't be measured. Then around 1990, the word started taking off again. Freud became a hot topic again, psychoanalysts. But now with brain science and the equipment we have and the technology, we can study the brain like never before. We can study the body like never before. And we all have an understanding that there is an unconscious process involved. Our body is operating in an unconscious basis right now. I'm not a yogi or a mystic, so my heart is just going. My stomach, when I eat, is just that naturally digesting. That's all happening unconscious. And there is an unconscious basis for every thought. And just for the audience to get an idea, Colette earlier mentioned about reading a book. And you can be reading a book and you start filling out the pieces that the book is missing. And the pieces, the way that you're filling out these pieces of the book are stemming from your experiences through the five senses that you have, which is super interesting conversation. And I'm sorry this is really deep, but I wanted to touch this because I know you're really into it. So guided imagery, to go back to what you were saying, is a way to bring this unconscious way, not unconscious way of thinking, but this unconscious reality that's within you through your five senses and experiences, and really bring it out so you see what you really want for your life. And I find that so interesting, Colette. And so thank you for touching about the subconscious, because I tend not to comment too much about that, but the way you used it was really good.
Thank you.
So, and I appreciate you once again for being on this platform, okay? Because it's really cool conversation.
Thank you for
having me. No, please. So mindfulness, does that word to you mean the same as consciousness? Because the word mindfulness is something that's been popular now more than it was, let's say, 15 years ago. Now there's things in psychology called mindful interventions, and it sounds so much nicer off the tongue and kinder than conscious interventions. And and for me, those words are synonymous with each other, but I just want to see what your perspective was on it.
Yeah, actually, the first time I was introduced to the term mindfulness was in a course I took in college called Religions of the World, where I was introduced to a Buddhist nun. And that was, to me, an oxymoron. I didn't even know that existed. And so she came into our class and it had us experience mindfulness, in which she placed a nut in our hand, like it's say an almond. And she had us close our eyes and go through this exercise of picking it up, placing it into our mouth, feeling it on our tongue, moving it around, chewing down once, chewing down twice, chewing down 3 times, so on and so forth, and then finally feeling it swallow down your throat. And she taught us that was mindful eating. And a lot of the ways that we're eating in society is kind of just like, you don't even realize you're doing it. So that's the first experience I had with mindfulness. And I realized how much different I felt in that moment eating that piece of food that she had placed in my hand versus how I typically eat, which is kind of just this autopilot of eating, and not really noticing that maybe I'm not actually hungry. I'm rather full, and I'm just continuing to eat because it's just this habit. So that was yeah, right? Exactly. So that opens up a whole nother can of worms for another conversation on the gut brain topic, but we won't go there today. What I wanted to say though is I do feel like it is kind of a more simplistic way of explaining consciousness. As I said earlier, my passion is to be able to take more complex ideas and change them into simplified versions. So I feel like, as you mentioned, those terms are slightly interchangeable in the sense that consciousness might be more of that scientific jargon, whereas mindfulness is a little bit easier to digest for certain individuals. But I do feel as though they represent some of the same qualities in being in the moment and being present with whatever you're doing, whether it's eating, whether it's exercising, whether it's talking to someone. You're not watching TV and on your phone. That's not being mindful, because you're not paying attention to the program that you're watching, or you're not paying attention to your phone that you're scrolling through, right? And I think a lot of what we are doing in society, especially sometimes with Instagram, is mindless when we're just scrolling through. And so that just leads me to another kind of topic of, filling your feed with information that you want to see, not information that is just there, right? So that's why we follow one another, because it's helpful information that's going to make an impact, positive impact on your day, as opposed to following someone that might make you feel bad about yourself in a certain way, right? Or might make you be more judgmental on certain aspects. But going back to the term mindfulness and consciousness, I do feel as though they're somewhat of an interchangeable term.
So you're saying that maybe in the mornings I shouldn't just chug my protein shake or my glass of milk or whatever. I should kind of like take it in slowly, actually enjoy the taste. And I appreciate that. I appreciate that reminder, because it's true. It's true. We get so caught up in this life, and it's almost, we're always on survival mode, because we think, oh, if I don't get this done, this is going to happen. And once we get that done, then we have to get this done or else this is going to happen. And if I don't do this for this person, I'm going to let them down. And we get stuck on this type of autopilot and this type of way of living that we don't even realize it. And that talk about subconscious on a bigger level. So I really appreciate that. And I'm going to have to look at that, the monk nun, because I went to, let me tell you something. I went to Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, and I never saw that. I mean, I've seen a nun here in Western society, of course. I've seen monks, a lot of them, but I never saw a monk nun. I mean, I've even met shamans, and I've never seen a monk nun. So that's very interesting. I didn't even know that was possible. But
And
it's cool
just to clarify there, what Buddhist nun. So I'm not sure if we're using those terms interchangeably there for monk and Buddhist, but it was a Buddhist nun.
Wow, I'm kind of upset at myself that I don't know the difference after all the Dalai Lama books and everything, actually. I mean, Jesus. So I'm really going to have to look up that term. But, you know, Colette, it's been close to an hour, so I just want to do the closing statements, if you don't mind. And I just want to let you know, once again, I really appreciate you being on this platform. You know, this platform, we've gone all the way to Southeast Asia. We've met with, there's a lot of cool stuff that I never ended up putting out. I've only put out clips. Like, we've met with the mental health organization in Vietnam. We had a person inside who we actually went to the hospital and we met them. I never was able to put that out for the audience out there. You know, there's a lot of stuff we still have to put out over the last year that we've done. And we've interviewed shamans, like I mentioned, empaths, which is a type of healing that I was not aware about, and all types of healers. And the fact that you're doing what you're doing with Boss of Your Brain to try and help people engage in almost self-help practices, I think it's a good thing, even though there's a lot of backlash from my field right now towards this type of stuff. But to me, it's more about you're trying to do something good for individuals so they can find themselves. And I think that's the most important part about everything, because a lot of these diagnoses that are done by professionals like myself, they're just symptoms that a person is experiencing. And since they meet the specific criteria of symptoms, then we all of a sudden give them a diagnosis, and the diagnosis is supposed to be lifelong. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and there's a lot of different ways to get help. And there's professional help, but there's also self-help practices. And what you're doing with Boss of Your Brain, man, I have a lot of respect for. And I hope that next time you have that workshop, I sign up to your newsletter on your website or something. I'll reach out to you. You make sure you promote it good, because I like to join that.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. And I think just to kind of tie that in, there are so many ways out there that we know of, like therapists and medication and things that people are reverting to for their first option. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't. I think there's plenty of circumstances where that is necessary, but to have another option, an additional tool, I think that you can have a lot of tools on your tool belt. And I think expanding your education on those different tools is only going to be helpful, right? You have a lot of tools to help with one project. It's going to be better than only having a hammer.
That's Abraham Maslow. That's where you got it from. And that it makes perfect sense. He said the same thing. So I appreciate that. And I hope I hope you guys enjoyed this out there. And I appreciate you guys being Psych Lifers and enjoying the podcast. And thanks for following our Instagram page or our social media platforms. And check out Boss of Your Own Brain by Colette, the business owner. And I appreciate you, Colette, again. And we'll talk soon. All right. Psych Life, everybody.